File 19.
Chapter 21. Captain Nemo's Thunderbolt. We looked at the edge of the forest without rising, my hand stopping in the action of putting it to my mouth, Ned Land's completing its office. "Stones do not fall from the sky," remarked Conseil, "or they would merit the name of aerolites." A second stone, carefully aimed, that made a savoury pigeon's leg fall from Conseil's hand, gave still more weight to his observation. We all three arose, shouldered our guns, and were ready to reply to any attack. "Are they apes?" cried Ned Land. "Very nearly. They are savages." "To the boat," I said, hurrying to the sea. It was indeed necessary to beat a retreat, for about 20 natives armed with bows and slings appeared on the skirts of a copse that masked the horizon to the right, hardly 100 steps from us. Our boat was moored about 60 feet from us. The savages approached us, not running, but making hostile demonstrations. Stones and arrows fell thickly. Ned Land had not wished to leave his provisions, and in spite of his imminent danger, his pig on one side and kangaroos on the other, he went tolerably fast. In 2 minutes we were on the shore. To load the boat with provisions and arms, to push it out to sea, and ship the oars, was the work of an instant. We had not gone 2 cables' lengths when 100 savages, howling and gesticulating, entered the water up to their waists. I watched to see if their apparition would attract some men from the Nautilus onto the platform. But no. The enormous machine lying off was absolutely deserted. 20 minutes later we were on board. The panels were open. After making the boat fast, we entered into the interior of the Nautilus. I descended to the drawing-room, from whence I heard some chords. Captain Nemo was there, bending over his organ, and plunged in a musical ecstasy. "Captain!" He did not hear me. "Captain!" I said again, touching his hand. He shuddered, and turning round said, "Ah, it is you, Professor. Well, have you had a good hunt? Have you botanized successfully?" "Yes, Captain, but we have unfortunately brought a troop of bipeds whose vicinity troubles me." "What bipeds?" "Savages." "Savages," he echoed ironically. "So you are astonished, Professor, at having set foot on a strange land and finding savages." "Savages? Where are there not any? Besides, are they worse than others, those whom you call savages?" "But, Captain, how many have you counted?" 100 at least." "Monsieur Aronnax," replied Captain Nemo, placing his fingers on the organ stops, "when all the natives of Papua are assembled on this shore, the Nautilus will have nothing to fear from their attacks." The captain's fingers were then running over the keys of the instrument, and I remarked that he touched only the black keys, which gave to his melodies an essentially Scotch character. Soon he had forgotten my presence, and had plunged into a reverie that I did not disturb. I went up again onto the platform. Night had already fallen, for in this low latitude the sun sets rapidly and without twilight. I could only see the island indistinctly, but the numerous fires lighted on the beach showed that the natives did not think of leaving it. I was alone for several hours, sometimes thinking of the natives, but without any dread of them, for the imperturbable confidence of the captain was catching, sometimes forgetting them to admire the splendours of the night in the tropics. My remembrances went to France, in the train of those zodiacal stars that would shine in some hours' time. The moon shone in the midst of the constellation of the zenith. The night slipped away without any mischance, the islanders frightened no doubt at the sight of a monster aground in the bay. The panels were open and would have offered an easy access to the interior of the Nautilus. At 6 o'clock on the morning of the 8th of January I went up onto the platform. The dawn was breaking. The island soon showed itself through the dissipating fogs, first the shore, then the summits. The natives were there, more numerous than on the day before, 500 or 600 perhaps. Some of them, profiting by the low water, had come onto the coral at less than 2 cable lengths from the Nautilus. I distinguished them easily. They were true Papuans, with athletic figures, men of good race, large high foreheads, large but not broad and flat, and white teeth. Their woolly hair, with a reddish tinge, showed off on their black shining bodies like those of the Nubians. From the lobes of their ears, cut and distended, hung chaplets of bones. Most of these savages were naked. Amongst them I remarked some women, dressed from the hips to knees in quite a crinoline of herbs that sustained a vegetable waistband. Some chiefs had ornamented their necks with a crescent and collars of glass beads, red and white. Nearly all were armed with bows, arrows, and shields, and carried on their shoulders a sort of net containing those round stones which they cast from their slings with great skill. One of these chiefs, rather near to the Nautilus, examined it attentively. He was, perhaps, a Mado of high rank, for he was draped in a mat of banana leaves, notched round the edges, and set off with brilliant colours. I could easily have knocked down this native, who was within a short length, but I thought that it was better to wait for real hostile demonstrations. Between Europeans and savages it is proper for the Europeans to parry sharply, not to attack. During low water the natives roamed about near the Nautilus, but were not troublesome. I heard them frequently repeat the word "assai," and by their gestures I understood that they invited me to go on land, an invitation that I declined. So that on that day the boat did not push off, to the great displeasure of Master Land, who could not complete his provisions. This adroit Canadian employed his time in preparing the viands and meat that he had brought off the island. As for the savages, they returned to the shore about 11 o'clock in the morning, as soon as the coral tops began to disappear under the rising tide. But I saw their numbers had increased considerably on the shore. Probably they came from the neighbouring islands, or very likely from Papua. However, I had not seen a single native canoe. Having nothing better to do, I thought of dragging these beautiful limpid waters, under which I saw a profusion of shells, zoophytes, and marine plants. Moreover, it was the last day that the Nautilus would pass in these parts, if it float in open sea the next day, according to Captain Nemo's promise. I therefore called Conseil, who brought me a little light drag, very like those for the oyster fishery. Now to work. For 2 hours we fished unceasingly, but without bringing up any rarities. The drag was filled with Midas ears, harps, melames, and particularly the most beautiful hammers I have ever seen. We also brought up some holothurius, pearl oysters, and a dozen little turtles that were reserved for the pantry on board. But just when I expected it least, I put my hand on a wonder, I might say a natural deformity, very rarely met with. Conseil was just dragging, and his net came up filled with divers ordinary shells, when all at once he saw me plunge my arm quickly into the net to draw out a shell, and heard me utter a conchological cry, that is to say, the most piercing cry that human throat can utter. "What is the matter, sir?" he asked in surprise. "Has master been bitten?" "No, my boy, but I would willingly have given a finger for my discovery." What discovery? This shell, I said, holding up the object of my triumph. It is simply an olive porphyry, genus olive, order of the Pectinibranchidae, class of gasteropods, subclass of mollusca. Yes, Conseil, but instead of being rolled from right to left, this olive turns from left to right. Is it possible? Yes, my boy, it is a left shell. Shells are all right-handed with rare exceptions, and when by chance their spiral is left, amateurs are ready to pay their weight in gold.